Marcus Thompson was a man who seemed to have it all. He lived in a cozy house in Atlanta with his wife, Jasmine, and worked as an architect at a top firm. On paper, his life looked perfect. Steady job, loving spouse, and dreams that were slowly turning into reality. But Marcus had a secret. Beneath the polished surface of his life, things weren't as smooth as they appeared. For years, Marcus and Jasmine had been growing apart. At first, it was small things. Late dinners because of work meetings, missed birthdays due to tight deadlines, and weekends spent glued to his laptop instead of enjoying time together. Marcus always told himself he was doing it for their future. "Once I make partner," he would say, "everything will fall into place." But Jasmine wasn't so sure. She wanted more than just promises. She wanted presence. Their arguments became more frequent, each one chipping away at the foundation of their marriage. Money was often the spark that lit the fire. Jasmine felt like Marcus prioritized his career over their home, while Marcus believed Jasmine didn't understand how hard he worked to give them a better life. One evening, after yet another heated exchange, something inside Marcus snapped. As Jasmine stood in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face, Marcus realized he couldn't keep living this way. The weight of their struggles pressed down on him, suffocating him. That night, Marcus packed a suitcase. He didn't take much, just a few clothes and some personal items. When Jasmine asked where he was going, he simply said, "I need space." It wasn't fair to either of them, he reasoned. Staying felt like drowning, and leaving seemed like the only way out. So, without looking back, Marcus walked out the door, closing the chapter of his life with Jasmine. At first, freedom tasted sweet. Marcus rented a small apartment downtown and threw himself into his work. Without the distractions of home, he climbed the ranks faster than ever before. Promotions came his way, and soon he was making more money than he'd ever imagined. Friends admired his success, but deep down, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. Nights were the hardest. Alone in his apartment, he replayed memories of Jasmine, the sound of her laughter, the warmth of her hugs, and wondered if he'd made the right choice. Still, Marcus convinced himself that leaving was the best decision. After all, they were happier apart, weren't they? Or at least that's what he told himself every time doubt crept in. Little did Marcus know, fate had other plans. Somewhere out there, a twist awaited him. A revelation that would force him to confront everything he thought he knew about love, family, and second chances. Life without Jasmine was a strange mix of freedom and loneliness for Marcus. On one hand, he no longer had to deal with the arguments or the pressure of balancing work and home. He could come and go as he pleased, eat when he wanted, and focus entirely on his career. But on the other hand, something felt missing, like a piece of him had been left behind in that house they once shared. Marcus threw himself into his job with even more intensity than before. His boss noticed his dedication and rewarded him with bigger projects and promotions. Within 2 years, Marcus became a senior partner at the firm, earning a salary that allowed him to upgrade his small apartment to a sleek condo downtown. Friends admired his success, calling him a self-made man and asking how he managed to climb so high so quickly. Marcus smiled through these conversations but never mentioned the cost of his achievements, the broken marriage, the empty nights, the lingering guilt. To fill the void, Marcus started volunteering at a local community center. Every Saturday morning, he mentored young Black students who dreamed of careers in architecture and design. Teaching them brought him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The kids called him Mr. T, short for Marcus Thompson, and looked up to him as a role model. They loved hearing his stories about designing skyscrapers and bridges, and Marcus loved seeing their eyes light up with excitement. For a few hours each week, he didn't feel quite so alone. But no matter how busy he kept himself, thoughts of Jasmine still crept into his mind. Sometimes it happened when he passed by their favorite coffee shop or heard a song they used to listen to together. Other times it was triggered by random moments, a couple holding hands on the street, laughter echoing from a nearby park. Each time, Marcus pushed those memories away, telling himself that moving on was the right thing to do. As time went on, Marcus began to build a new routine. Weekdays were all about work, early mornings at the office, client meetings over lunch, and late nights drafting blueprints. Weekends belonged to the community center and occasional dinners with friends. Life became predictable, safe, and comfortable. Yet, deep down, Marcus knew something was off. Comfort wasn't the same as happiness. One evening, while scrolling through social media, Marcus stumbled across an old photo of Jasmine. It was taken years ago during a vacation they'd gone on together, just the two of them, standing under a palm tree, smiling like nothing else mattered. Looking at that picture stirred emotions Marcus had buried long ago. He remembered how much fun they'd had on that trip, how easy things had been between them back then. Before the fights. Before the distance, before everything fell apart. Shaking his head, Marcus closed the app and set his phone aside. He told himself not to dwell on the past. After all, there was no going back now. What's done is done, he thought. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, had he really made the right choice? Was this life, this shiny, successful, solitary life, enough to make up for what he'd lost? Little did Marcus know, fate had plans to answer those questions sooner than he expected. Somewhere out there, a surprise awaited him, one that would turn his world upside down and force him to confront the choices he'd made. Until then, Marcus continued living his new life, unaware that the next chapter of his story was already unfolding. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon when Marcus found himself attending a charity gala at a downtown hotel. The event was organized to raise funds for a children's hospital, and as someone who occasionally donated to community causes, Marcus had decided to show his support. Dressed in a sharp suit, he mingled with other guests, exchanging polite smiles and small talk about the importance of giving back. As Marcus wandered through the crowded hall, sipping on a glass of sparkling water, something, or rather someone, caught his eye. Across the room stood Jasmine. She looked different now, her hair styled in loose curls and her dress a soft shade of lavender that complemented her warm smile. But what really stopped Marcus in his tracks were the 4 little figures surrounding her. 4 identical toddlers, all laughing and tugging at her hands, their faces beaming with joy. Marcus froze, his breath catching in his throat. Quadruplets? His mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. How could this be possible? Were they his? He felt a strange mix of shock, confusion, and guilt swirling inside him. For years he'd convinced himself that leaving Jasmine was the right decision. But now, standing there, watching her interact with those children, he couldn't help but wonder, what if he'd stayed? What if he'd known? Before he could fully gather his thoughts, Jasmine glanced up and noticed him. Her smile faltered for a split second before she quickly composed herself. She whispered something to the kids, who immediately quieted down, then turned her attention back to Marcus. There was no anger in her expression, just a calm curiosity, as if she'd expected this moment might come someday. Unable to ignore the pull of the scene, Marcus slowly made his way toward her. Every step felt heavier than the last, his heart pounding in his chest. When he finally reached her, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Jasmine," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "Hi." She gave him a polite nod. "Marcus, it's been a long time." The kids stared up at him with wide, curious eyes, their tiny fingers clutching Jasmine's dress. Marcus forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, it has," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "They're amazing. Your kids." Jasmine's lips curved into a faint smile, but there was a hint of sadness behind. "Thank you," she said simply. She didn't elaborate or offer any details, leaving Marcus hanging on the edge of an unspoken truth. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the presence of the children held him back. Instead, he stood there, feeling like an outsider looking in on a world he didn't recognize. After a few moments of awkward silence, Jasmine excused herself, saying the kids needed to get home soon. As she walked away, the quadruplets trailing. Behind her like ducklings, Marcus watched them go, his mind spinning with questions. Who were those children? Did they belong to him? And why hadn't Jasmine told him about them? The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Marcus. He barely registered the speeches or the applause, his thoughts consumed by the image of Jasmine and the quadruplets. That night, as he lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought kept replaying in his mind. This changes everything. The next morning, Marcus couldn't shake the image of Jasmine and the quadruplets from his mind. He replayed their brief encounter over and over again, dissecting every word she said or didn't say. It was clear that she hadn't planned to tell him anything about the children. But why? Was it because she thought he wouldn't care? Or, maybe, because she didn't want him to know? Marcus knew he couldn't let it go. The curiosity gnawing at him was too strong, and something deeper, a mix of guilt, responsibility, and even a flicker of hope, pushed him to seek answers. That afternoon he mustered up the courage to call Jasmine. His hands trembled as he dialed her number, unsure of how she would react. "Hello?" Her voice came through the line, calm but cautious. "Jasmine, it's me," Marcus said quickly before he lost his nerve. I need to talk to you about yesterday." There was a pause on the other end, long enough to make Marcus wonder if she'd hang up. Finally, she sighed. "Okay, let's meet." They agreed to see each other later that evening at a quiet cafe near the park. When Marcus arrived, Jasmine was already seated at a corner table sipping tea. She looked tired, but composed, her expression unreadable. As Marcus approached, she gestured for him to sit down. "I'm not here to argue or cause trouble," Marcus began, his tone gentle. I saw them yesterday. The kids. And I have questions." Jasmine nodded slowly as though she'd been expecting this conversation. "I figured you would," she said quietly. "What do you want to know?" Marcus hesitated, unsure where to start. "Are they mine?" The words felt heavy, leaving his lips, but they hung in the air between them demanding an answer. Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "Yes," she said after a moment. "They're yours." Marcus's heart sank and soared all at once. A rush of emotions flooded through him. Shock, disbelief, joy, and overwhelming regret. He had children, 4 of them, and he hadn't known. "How could you not tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking despite his best efforts to stay composed. "Why didn't you say something?" Jasmine's eyes softened, but there was a firmness in her tone. "Because you left, Marcus. You walked out, without looking back. I found out I was pregnant with quadruplets shortly before we separated. I thought about telling you, but..." She trailed off, shaking her head. "You made it pretty clear that you didn't want to be part of my life anymore." Her words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. What could he say? She was right, he had left. He'd chosen his career, his freedom over their relationship, and now, years later, he was facing the consequences of that choice. "They're 6 now," Jasmine continued, breaking the silence. "Their names are Ava, Elijah, Noah, and Mia. They're smart, funny, and full of energy. They've brought so much light into my life." Her voice softened as she spoke about the kids, and Marcus could hear the love in her words. "I can't change the past," Marcus said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to be part of their lives if you'll let me." Jasmine studied him carefully, searching his face for sincerity. After what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "We'll take it slow," she said firmly, "for their sake and ours." Relief washed over Marcus, but it was tinged with uncertainty. He knew earning Jasmine's trust and the trust of his children wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years he felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just about fixing his mistakes. It was about building something new, something real, something worth fighting for. The days that followed Marcus's conversation with Jasmine were filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he had a purpose beyond himself. A reason to wake up every morning with something meaningful to work toward. But as eager as he was to meet his children, he also knew this wouldn't be easy. These weren't just any kids, they were 6-year-olds who had grown up without him. How could he possibly step into their lives now and expect them to accept him? Jasmine kept her word about taking things slow. She invited Marcus to visit on weekends when the quadruplets were busy with activities, soccer practice, art classes, or play dates at the park. At first, Marcus simply observed from a distance, watching how Jasmine interacted with the kids. He marveled at their energy, their laughter, and the way they seemed to light up every room they entered. They looked so much like him. Their dark eyes, their curious expressions, even the way they tilted their heads when asking questions. It was both beautiful and heartbreaking, knowing he'd missed so much of their early years. When it came time for Marcus to actually meet them, Jasmine prepared the kids gently. "This is someone special," she told them one Saturday morning. "His name is Marcus, and he wants to get to know all of you." The quadruplets exchanged glances, unsure what to make of this stranger standing awkwardly by the door. "Hi, everyone," Marcus said, forcing a warm smile. "I'm really happy to meet you." Ava, the most outspoken of the group, frowned slightly. "Why are you here?" she asked bluntly. Marcus chuckled nervously. "Well, I thought maybe we could spend some time together. Maybe I can teach you guys something fun." Elijah, always the thinker, piped up next. "Like what?" Marcus glanced around the room, spotting a stack of building blocks on the floor. "How about we build something cool, like a tower, or even a castle?" That caught their attention. Within minutes, the four of them were gathered around Marcus, eagerly handing him blocks and chiming in with ideas. As they worked together, Marcus found himself relaxing for the first time since walking back into their lives. The kids laughed at his silly jokes and cheered when their castle finally stood tall. For those few hours, Marcus didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like part of the team. Over the weeks, Marcus made it a point to show up consistently. He attended soccer games, cheering loudly whenever Elijah scored a goal. He helped Noah with math homework, turning numbers into stories to make learning fun. He read bedtime stories to Mia, whose love for fairy tales reminded him of his own childhood. And he let Ava drag him to her school plays, where she proudly introduced him to her friends as "my dad." At first, the kids were cautious, testing his patience and loyalty. But Marcus didn't give up. Slowly, they began to trust him, not because of grand gestures, but because of the little things he did every day. Like remembering Elijah's favorite snack, helping Ava tie her shoelaces, or simply listening when Noah talked about his dreams of becoming an astronaut. Through these moments, Marcus realized how much he'd been missing. Being a father wasn't just about providing. It was about showing up, being present, and creating memories. Each laugh, each hug, each shared glance brought him closer to understanding what truly mattered. But it wasn't just about the kids. Spending time with them gave Marcus a chance to reconnect with Jasmine too. Though their relationship remained complicated, there were moments of warmth, shared smiles over the chaos of parenting, quiet conversations late at night after the kids fell asleep. Marcus began to see Jasmine not just as his ex-wife, but as a partner in raising their children. Together, they navigated the challenges of co-parenting, finding common ground despite their past. As Marcus settled into this new rhythm, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. Leaving Jasmine had once felt like the only way out, but now stepping back into her world and theirs felt like coming home. As Marcus grew closer to his children, he began noticing things that broke his heart. The world wasn't always kind to them or to Jasmine. Even at their young age, the quadruplets were already experiencing moments of unfairness simply because of the color of their skin. It started with small incidents. Ava being told her natural hair was too messy for picture day, Elijah being singled out by a teacher for talking during class when other kids were doing the same, or Noah being mistaken for someone else in his class who looked nothing like him. At first, Marcus tried to brush it off as isolated events, things that could happen to anyone. But then came the bigger moments. One afternoon, while picking the kids up from soccer practice, Marcus watched as a store clerk followed Elijah closely around the shop, even though he was just looking at toys. When Marcus confronted the clerk, the man stammered excuses, but the damage was done. Elijah's face had turned red with embarrassment, and later that night he asked Marcus why people sometimes treated him differently. That question stayed with Marcus long after Elijah had fallen asleep. He realized these weren't random occurrences. They were part of a larger pattern, a system that often failed black children before they even had a chance to grow up. Determined to make a difference, Marcus decided to take action, not just for his own kids, but for others like them. He approached Jasmine with an idea. "We need to do more," he said one evening after the kids were in bed. "Not just for Ava, Elijah, Noah, and Mia, but for all the kids out there who face this every single day." Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking the same thing. But where do we start?" Together, they brainstormed ways to create change within their community. They began organizing workshops at local schools, teaching students about racial pride and self-worth. Marcus used his architectural skills to design spaces where kids could gather safely, community centers, libraries, and parks specifically tailored to celebrate black culture and history. Jasmine, meanwhile, reached out to other parents and educators, forming support groups to share resources and advice on navigating systemic challenges. Their efforts didn't stop there. Marcus and Jasmine partnered with local organizations to host fundraisers, raising money for scholarships aimed at black youth pursuing higher education. They also worked with teachers and administrators to address biases in classrooms, advocating for inclusive curriculums that highlighted diverse voices. Slowly but surely, their initiatives gained traction, drawing attention from neighbors, friends, and even strangers who wanted to help. Through it all, the Quadruplets became active participants in their parents' mission. Ava loved helping decorate posters for events, her creativity shining through in bold colors and inspiring messages. Elijah took pride in speaking to younger kids about standing up for themselves, sharing stories of how he'd learned to handle tough situations. Noah dreamed of becoming an astronaut, and together with Marcus, he designed model rockets for science fairs, proving that representation mattered everywhere, even in STEM fields. And shy little Mia, who once clung to Marcus during school plays, now confidently handed out flyers at community meetings, encouraging others to join the cause. Seeing his children thrive in this environment filled Marcus with a sense of purpose he'd never known before. For years, he'd chased success in his career, believing it would bring fulfillment. But now, watching Ava laugh with her friends, hearing Elijah talk passionately about fairness, seeing Noah light up when explaining his rocket designs, and feeling Mia's tiny hand slip into his during rallies, it all reminded him what truly mattered. Success wasn't about titles or paychecks, it was about making a difference. Marcus often thought about how far he'd come since that fateful gala where he'd first seen his children. Back then, he'd been overwhelmed by guilt and regret, unsure if he deserved a second chance. Now he understood that redemption wasn't given, it was earned. Every step he took alongside Jasmine and the Quadruplets brought him closer to healing old wounds and building a brighter future. And yet, as much progress as they made, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. There was still so much work to be done, for his family, for their community, and for generations to come. But for the first time in his life, Marcus felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. Together they were stronger. Together they were unstoppable. As the months turned into years, Marcus and Jasmine's partnership evolved in unexpected ways. They weren't just co-parents anymore. They were teammates, united by their shared love for their children and their commitment to creating a better world for them. But that didn't mean everything was smooth sailing. Their past still lingered between them, old wounds that hadn't fully healed, moments of tension when memories resurfaced, and unspoken questions about what might have been. One evening, after a long day of organizing a community event, Marcus and Jasmine found themselves alone in her kitchen. The kids were upstairs asleep, exhausted from a day filled with activities. Jasmine leaned against the counter, sipping tea, while Marcus sat at the table scrolling through emails on his phone. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the space between them. "You've changed," Jasmine said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice wasn't accusatory, it was soft, almost curious. Marcus looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly, setting her cup down. "You're not the same person who walked out all those years ago. Back then, I thought you cared more about your career than anything else now." She paused, searching for the right words. "Now I see how much you care about our kids and about doing the right thing." Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he'd always cared. But deep down, he knew she had a point. The truth was, he had been selfish back then, chasing success without realizing what he was sacrificing along the way. Hearing Jasmine acknowledge his growth meant more to him than she could ever know. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything, for leaving, for not being there when you needed me, for missing so much of their lives." Jasmine sighed, her expression softening. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, Marcus. It did. A lot. But holding on to anger isn't helping anyone. Not me, not you. And definitely not the kids. What matters now is that you're here, that we're working together. For them." Her words struck a chord in Marcus. Forgiveness wasn't something he deserved. It was something Jasmine chose to give, not because he earned it, but because she believed in moving forward. And for the first time, Marcus allowed himself to let go of the guilt that had weighed him down for so long. He couldn't change the past, but he could shape the future. And Jasmine was giving him the chance to do just that. Their relationship didn't blossom back into romance. They both agreed it wasn't meant to be. But it grew into something deeper, a friendship rooted in mutual respect and trust. They learned to communicate openly, sharing parenting responsibilities and supporting each other through challenges. Whether it was navigating school issues, dealing with neighborhood concerns, or simply figuring out bedtime routines, they faced it all as a team. The kids noticed the shift too. Gone were the awkward silences and tense exchanges whenever Marcus visited. Instead, they saw their parents laughing together, planning family outings, and even joking around during dinner. It made them feel safe, loved, and secure, a feeling they carried with them wherever they went. Still, there were moments when reality reminded them of the complexities of their situation. On birthdays or holidays, old emotions sometimes bubbled to the surface. One particularly emotional Mother's Day, Marcus overheard Ava asking Jasmine why he hadn't lived with them when they were babies. Jasmine handled the question gracefully, explaining that people make mistakes, but can learn and grow from them. Later that night, Marcus thanked her for handling it so well. "It's not about protecting them from the truth," Jasmine told him. "It's about teaching them that everyone deserves a second chance, including you." Those words stayed with Marcus long after the day ended. Second chances weren't easy. They required effort, patience, and humility. But every hug from his kids, every smile from Jasmine, and every step forward in their journey together reminded him that it was worth it. Together they were building something stronger than before. A family defined not by its struggles but by its resilience. And as Marcus tucked his children into bed that night, listening to their sleepy giggles and whispered goodnights, he realized something profound. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about embracing the present and creating a legacy of love that would last a lifetime. Years passed in a blur of laughter, challenges, and milestones. Marcus watched as his quadruplets grew from curious 6-year-olds into confident teenagers, each carving out their own unique path in life. Ava became an outspoken advocate for social justice, organizing protests and leading workshops at school to educate her peers about equality. Elijah channeled his love for storytelling into writing, penning essays and poems that captured the beauty and struggles of growing up Black in America. Noah's fascination with space never wavered. He earned top marks in science and secured a scholarship to study aerospace engineering. And Mia, once so shy she barely spoke, blossomed into a talented artist whose vibrant paintings told stories of hope and resilience. The day they graduated high school was one Marcus would never forget. Standing on the sidelines as each of them walked across the stage, he felt a swell of pride unlike anything he'd ever experienced. These were his kids, the ones he'd missed for so long but had fought to reconnect with. Seeing how far they'd come filled him with gratitude, not just for them, but for Jasmine, who had raised them with strength and grace despite everything they'd been through. After the ceremony, the family gathered at a park for a small celebration. Balloons bobbed in the breeze and laughter echoed as friends and relatives shared memories of the graduates. Marcus pulled Jasmine aside for a quiet moment. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he said sincerely. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve it." Jasmine smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "We did it together, Marcus. For them." That evening, as fireworks lit up the sky, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that fateful gala years ago. Back then, he'd defined success by promotions and paychecks, believing that achievements alone could bring fulfillment. But now, surrounded by his children, extended family, and close friends, he understood the true meaning of success: making an impact, leaving a legacy, and building connections that mattered. Marcus often thought about the lessons he'd learned along the way. He realized that life wasn't about avoiding mistakes, it was about learning from them. Leaving Jasmine had been one of the biggest regrets of his life, but returning to her and their children had taught him the value of accountability, forgiveness, and unconditional love. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when old wounds surfaced, but they faced those challenges together, stronger than before. As the years went on, Marcus continued his advocacy work, partnering with organizations to uplift Black communities and mentor young people. His efforts inspired others, including his own children, who carried his passion for change into their respective fields. Ava founded a nonprofit focused on empowering marginalized youth. Elijah published a collection of essays that gained national attention. Noah dreamed of designing spacecraft that would inspire future generations of scientists, while Mia used her art to spark conversations about identity and culture. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded in the knowledge that his greatest achievement wasn't the skyscrapers he'd designed or the accolades he'd earned. It was the family he'd rebuilt. The bond he shared with Jasmine transformed into a deep friendship, one built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Together, they navigated parenthood, celebrated victories, and weathered storms, proving that even broken relationships can heal with time and effort. One evening, as Marcus sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ava joined him, holding a cup of tea. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you hadn't come back?" Marcus took a moment to consider her question. "All the time," he admitted. "But I'm glad I did. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have gotten to know you, and Elijah, Noah, and Mia. You four are my greatest gift." Ava smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We're lucky to have you too." In that moment, Marcus felt complete. Life hadn't turned out the way he'd planned, but it had given him something far better: a second chance to be a father, a partner, and a force for good in the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus knew one thing for certain: he was exactly where he was meant to be.